Hey everyone, how's it going? So today I'm actually going to be doing a lens comparison video. Why am I doing that? In the last video I said that I'm going to be talking about the things I've learned over the past year. Well, one of those things is actually that hiking and backpacking with a lot of weight in your back sucks. So I want to cut down on my weight a little bit. Actually, a lot of other photographers who do hiking and backpacking, they use a kind of classic combination of a Nikon D810 or D850 with a 14-24 and a 24-200. Basically covers the entire focal range that matters for most people with only 2 lenses. And I've been trying to tough it out and use 3 lenses, which is about 3 pounds heavier. And I'll show you why. So I use a Sony A7R III with a Sigma 14-24, which is what you're on right now. And then I have these 2 lenses, the Sony 24-105 and the Canon 70-300. And this thing weighs, with a Metabones adapter, almost 3 pounds. So this is what I want to get rid of. And I want to replace them, or I want to see if I can replace them with this. This is the Tamron 20-200, and it would replace both of these. So I would only need to take this and the Sigma lens. So this would save me about 3 pounds, but I want to see how sharp this lens is, how good the image quality is, to see if it's worth making the downgrade or upgrade, whatever it is, change. So I'm going to just shoot some trees over here. I'll go through all of the focal lengths with all of the 3 lenses, and then we'll take the images to my computer and we'll see how it looks. By the way, I mentioned in my last video that Seattle parks are really cool and wild. This is what I meant. Check this out. This is inside the city, or just south of the city. You can still hear a bit of plane noise flying overhead, but this is so cool. And no one's coming in this trail. So I have this spot all to myself. All right, let's get into the actual lens comparison. Okay, here we go. I have the Tamron on the camera right now, and I'm shooting this scene over here. It's just a test composition, nothing fancy. I'm focusing on that middle tree, and there's a row of trees basically. And we're gonna go from 28 all the way to 200. The mid-range shots, so I think 24 and 70, I'll shoot with this one and then compare to this one here, to the 24-105. And then 120 and 200, I'll compare to this one. And maybe I'll take it 300 with this one too, just to see what that looks like. But this is going to be a long and boring sequence, so I'm not going to film that. I'll just take care of this now, and then I'll see you back at home, and we'll look at these images on the computer. Okay, here we go. So actually, I ended up shooting a different scene later in the day. The previous scene was just too chaotic and the midday light was just not working. It would have been too hard to analyze that scene. So this one I think is going to be much better. I've already applied lens corrections to these images, and I've done some minor exposure and color balance tweaks. All of the images can be downloaded through the link in the description. First, we're going to look at the images at 28mm, at f4, f11, and f16. And then we'll look at the same for 70, 120, and 200mm. You can see which image I'm currently viewing at the bottom right. By the way, f4 might be just a little bit more, like f4.5 or f5 because of variable aperture, but I'm just going to call that f4 just to keep things simple. So looking at 28mm, f4, I think the Sony is maybe a tiny bit better at the center. It's not really noticeable. And I think there's slightly better edge sharpness as well. Now going to f11, at the center, the Sony is maybe a little bit sharper, maybe a little better image quality, but at the edges, it really shines. You can see that it's significantly sharper, and there's also less fringing, though fringing is an easy fix. At f16, they are actually more similar, I would say, both at the center and at the edges. Actually, the Tamron to me at f16 doesn't look that different from f11, so that's really interesting. Going to 70mm, they look fairly similar at f4. At f11, actually, the Tamron takes over, and I think it has better edge sharpness and maybe even slightly better sharpness in the center. At f16, they look comparable to me, both at the edges and in the center. Going to 120, and now I'm comparing against the Canon 70-300. And by the way, this Canon is one of the sharpest long-range lenses I've seen. I've tested it previously against the Sony 70-200, which is extremely expensive, and the Canon actually performed better. So that's why I've kept it and have been using it with the Metabones adapter with my Sony A7 III. So the Canon, I would say, is slightly better at 120 f4. And at f11, things get interesting. The Canon has, I would say, maybe slightly better sharpness on the tree itself. However, there's just more things in focus on the Tamron. And this could be because I messed up the focus, that's possible, but I don't see a difference in sharpness in things that are closer than the intended focus point, which is the tree. There's just more things in focus in general on the Tamron. By the way, there was no wind, and this was on a tripod, image stabilization was off. At f16, we see pretty much the same thing as f11, maybe less pronounced. Then at 200mm f4, the Canon is once again slightly better. It's not a big difference. Then at f11, yep, the Canon is maybe a little bit better, but the Tamron is just a little bit more in focus. And then we once again see the same thing at f16. So now let's jump into the side-by-side comparisons, and here you can really see the differences. And we'll only do these at f11 because probably most landscape photos get taken at f11 anyway. Looking at 28mm and zoomed into the center, I would say the Sony is, once again, as I mentioned before, a little bit better. Definitely much better at the edges. I also decided to take a shot from another location. This is just in my neighborhood, and here you can see the exact same pattern. Tamron is just maybe a tiny bit worse in the center, but significantly worse at the edges. Going to 70, we see almost the reverse. They're about equal at the center, but the Tamron definitely outperforms at the edges. And going to 120, as I mentioned before, we have this weird thing where more things are in focus on the Tamron. Only the focus point itself, the Canon is a little better. Looking at the same comparison when shooting the neighborhood, here all of the objects are very far away. This might resemble something like shooting a distant mountain range. And in this case, the Canon generally outperforms the Tamron on all accounts, but not by much. 200mm, the same story once again. And the most interesting thing to me is that if we take a 200mm shot on the Tamron and upscale it to match the 300mm shot on the Canon, they look fairly similar. The Canon is a little bit better, just as in other cases, but I would feel very confident in taking 200mm shots with the Tamron and zooming in on those to mimic a 300mm composition. So that's it. I would say I see no reason to carry this 3-pound 70-300 lens on big hikes. From now on, for most hikes, I will only take the Tamron and the Sigma, and that will be it, which I'm super excited about. That's 3 pounds and a lot less volume as well. The only concern with the Tamron is around 28, as you saw, but the Sigma that I have, the 14-24, is extremely sharp throughout the entire range. I've done comparisons with this one, and it's actually sharper than the Sony 16-35. With this lens, I would feel comfortable taking shots at 24 and cropping them down to even 35 or 40, and then using the Tamron for anything that's longer range than that. So between these two lenses, I think I have pretty good coverage for the entire focal range from 14 to 300. So that is it. If this was helpful, I would appreciate a like. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below. As I mentioned, the link to these images is also down below. And I'll also put in a link to another photographer, Mads Peter Iversen. I'm probably mispronouncing that. He's also done a comparison on the Tamron lens compared to the Sony lenses. His setup is very similar to mine. So if you would like to see more comparisons, that might be a good video to check out. Finally, if you would like to see more landscape photography related videos, consider subscribing. And that is it for me for today. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you again soon.